There's a reason why some designs instantly click with users, while others seem to fall flat no matter how polished they look. And it has less to do with flashy visuals and everything to do with psychology. So today we're unpacking the hidden forces that shape your users' decisions, the power of storytelling, and the ethics behind it all. So stick around and you'll discover why the best UX designers think like psychologists first. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things they didn't teach you in school. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book to learn more. How often do you stare at a blank Figma canvas, unsure where to start? Well, this week's episode is brought to you by Mobbin, the ultimate UI and UX design inspiration library. Mobbin gives you instant access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI and user flows from apps that you love, and content is added weekly, so you never have to start from scratch again. Quickly find exactly what you need, search by app category, UI patterns, or even specific features. And my team and I use Mobbin daily at work to find useful patterns, and it helps my team work much more efficiently. And honestly, I can't imagine kicking off a new feature without Mobbin. Ready to level up your design process? Visit mobbin.com/beyondux and get inspired today. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. So psychology is not just for psychologists. Now, you may have been following along the Cognition Catalog for a little while. I've been posting about psychology and how important that is for team dynamics, but it's still important for you to understand how those psychology principles apply to the humans that are using the tools that you are designing. And they're going to be using those things every day. And you got to know how humans work. And if you don't know how humans work, I think you're going to have a hard time designing for those humans. I've got my good buddy Mara Thorsrud on the show today, and we're going to talk all about psychology and UX design and how those two things align. Mara has worked with agencies, startups, and big name brands across B2B, B2C, e-commerce, and retention programs. Some of her proudest moments, transforming New York fashion startup Gwynnie Bee into a multi-million-dollar business and creating an IoT platform that connects the digital and physical worlds to help people achieve a better night's sleep at Sleep Number. In these days, Mara's crafting gorgeous experiences for luxury beauty, skin, and hair care products at Estée Lauder. Mara, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How is it going?
Good. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got connected a while back. How do we get connected? One of my former guests.
Yeah, former guest, actually, Anna East.
Anna East, that's right.
Right. So she and I worked together on UXPA Minnesota.
That's right.
So
All right.
I was the program director there.
Right on. And so we started talking about psychology and UX, and I said, we got to come on the show and talk about this because this is exactly up my alley, and I think this is really important for everybody out there to understand. I think this is one of those things where, when you go to boot camp, they teach you a process. They teach you, a step-by-step point, go follow the checklist from A to Z, outcomes, great software, but that is not always the case. And I often find that a lot of these, even college programs, they don't really teach you anything about psychology. But at the end of the day, we are designing for humans, and we've got to know how those humans work. And there's a lot of those like hidden psychological, I don't know what you call them, things that impact how a user perceives the tools. So I'm really excited to get into that with you today. So before we dig into all that, Tell us a little bit about you. You've got an awesome background, a lot of really big names that you work with, really impressive resume, I guess. So tell us a little bit about you and how you came to understand that psychology is really a fundamental thing that we need to be understanding as designers.
Yeah, so I've been designing for over 20 years. So, but I started in graphic design and not a ton of psychology, honestly, in graphic design, but maybe a little more than they ever really taught. Like a lot of the stuff I learned, on my own and, as things went by, I pivoted into user experience. I started learning more about psychology and design probably around 2012 or so. I had run into an article on button colors. It just how silly and simple, right? Just a button color, right? You'd think, oh, well, whatever. And then I started reading more about, how different colors represent different things. And then it was like a light bulb went off in my head because it was like, oh my gosh, do you know why medical companies use blue?
I don't.
It's because it's calming and it portrays trust. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding?" And then I started looking at all these different I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's it." And then, things like the color black or even like a dark purple, they can portray luxury. So, I was working at a fashion startup at the time. And so I started talking to my product partner and we started testing some of these theories about color. And, we ended up going with a dark purple and black for our brand color because it really honestly gave a sense of luxury. And we proved it by testing and asking. And we had a really strong test and learn approach to our work at Gwenny B. And, when we built that brand from the ground up and we just tested the heck out of everything. And that's really, I learned a lot about face placements and eye tracking and, all these little tiny things that, you don't realize how much they add up to a design in the end and how much they can really influence a design. And, what's really interesting to me is the way I found that out is I had an A/B test that went really horribly for me. I was like, oh, yeah, let's get these pretty models and we're going to put them right next to the login module. And I had one where she was looking right at it and she was super cute. And I thought, this is so great. And it bombed. It bombed so bad. And, sometimes our greatest learning moments are the things that we bomb the hardest. And I was like, why? Why did this bomb? She's so cute. This design is so much better. I don't understand. And then I finally realized after we'd done some more testing, I started asking, well, why did you not like this one? And I got the most interesting answer from several people. And it was, I felt like I was being watched. And I didn't want to enter my password. I know it's silly. I know it's silly, but I felt like I was being watched. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Tell me more. So that's kind of how I got into psychology of design because I hadn't realized how people think really deeply impacts design. And if you can figure out how people think, you can really win with designs. And I know that we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but back then, we really didn't talk about dark pattern, right? We really didn't discuss what is dark pattern. And basically, dark pattern is using psychology for nefarious purposes. And I'm guilty of it 100%. So we were trying to get subscribers and I was learning all about how to get people to do what I wanted them to do in the design. And I realized later, well, that's a little unethical. But at the time, we were still kind of exploring this and learning and trying to understand it. So I think there are definitely ways we can do this with good ethics, right? I think for me, designers, we have to hold our ethical being so tight because we're the front runners to everything, right? We are the interface. And if we don't have good ethics, I think that can bode not well for others.
Absolutely. I totally agree. It's really fascinating too when I think about how people use patterns for good or for evil. I actually have this book. I need to get this guy on the show. This is a really I'm going to call it out because I like this book a lot. but Deceptive Patterns, Exposing the Tricks Tech Companies Use to Control You by Harry Rignall. I got to get this guy on the show. Anyway, this is a really great book. It talks all about that. And it's more of like, well, it's kind of like about UX designers, how people can not fall for it, but also how UX designers can use the patterns for good and not for evil. It's really fascinating how easily people are manipulated. That's the thing. I think like overall the theme of the show today is how to use that power of manipulation for good so that you can find the right and the best experience and not manipulate people into doing things the wrong way.
I mean, even color, something as small as color can really influence your decisions and whether or not you're going to click a button and how you feel about how you're clicking that button.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I've heard from product people and engineers a lot about how like UX designers will stress over the color of a button for, days or weeks and just pick a damn color. And I think
It's
about,
not important.
yeah, I think about that study that Google did years ago when they were trying to figure out the default hyperlink blue. And the number of, this was like 10 or 15 years ago. I can't remember, I just remember reading it back when I first started UX design back in like 2011 or so. I remember my engineer lead making fun of Google for like, just pick a stupid blue, who cares? But it's just kind of funny how, Google obviously, I think is doing something right when they spend all that time thinking about it. But they have the resources, obviously, not everybody
Well,
can
I
spend the
mean,
money.
you can always joke back to your engineering friends. Yeah, how do you feel about Dreamweaver just dropping random code into, how do you feel about, somebody just writing code in Word? I mean, it's a similar kind of thing to designers picking colors, I think, but there really are deep psychology things behind it, and especially when you're designing for something global, you have to be a little more cautious with it because certain colors have certain connotations for different cultures. And we need to learn how to make sure that we are being respectful for that and not accidentally doing something that is kind of like really cringe. So because it can happen. There's a lot of factors I feel that go into design that aren't really always about UI either. You have to understand users so deeply these days because if AI is never going to understand these things, we have to be the ones that are shaping it because AI can discover all the patterns and throw it out there and give you a skeleton of things. But like we have to be the ones to help shape the ethics and to help shape the deeper meanings on a bunch of these things that AI just is never going to pick up on.
For sure. So I want to talk first, like before we dig too deep into this, I want to kind of set the stage. And I think this is really important for us to kind of think about because a lot of times I think you'll hear, design is all about taste and design is about, like good visual design is really going to set you apart and things like that. But the interesting thing that I think about a lot is, humans are essentially animals. We do a lot of things by instinct. We have a lot of shortcuts that we use in our brain, whether they are cultural or, like you mentioned, or ingrained instinctually humans will behave a certain way. Nature versus nurture, it doesn't really matter. But there are these quick shortcuts that humans will use all the time. And I wonder if you just sort of talk about that just from your experience. I know this is a pretty broad topic. You could probably spend an entire hour on that alone, but just sort of setting the stage for why this idea of psychology is really just so fundamental for UX designers, especially.
I mean, we've all heard about the book Don't Make Me Think, right? Steve Krug. You probably have it right there on your shelf somewhere.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's right there.
I have a digital copy.
Right next
so
to the design of everyday things. Yeah.
I can show you my iPad. Here's my library.
I like having the physical books so you can see them on YouTube and admire how well read I am.
I switched to iPad when I had to move across the country and I realized I had to pack all this stuff and lug a box of books. And I went, oh no.
Yeah.
So, but no, what's interesting is the easier your interface, right? The less your user has to think and the more they can just flow, the happier they're going to be. And the easier you're going to be able to accomplish their goals and yours, right? So great UX, I'm always, we talk about user centered or, consumer centered or customer centric. And, I work in ecom and I approach this with this, I have this philosophy, right? Like great UX is really that symbiotic relationship between what your user needs and what the business needs. And where it meets is kind of like the sweet spot, right? Because you want things to be easy for the user. You want them to be able to accomplish all the things that they need to do, whether it's buying a lipstick, purchasing a bed, or, doing whatever it is they need to do. And then your business also has goals, right? So we can't just say, oh, well, the user wants to do this, because the truth is, if the business isn't making money, then you're already setting yourself up for failure, even if your user is doing exactly what they need, right? So to me, great UX is right where those two things merge. And if you can really get into what makes people think, what makes them tick, how do you help them be able to do what they need to do with as little friction as possible? Then you've set your user up for success and you've set your business up for success.
Yeah. You know what I find really fascinating too about just these ideas about how humans work is, I see a lot of people talk about, the psychology for design. There's like laws of UX and things like that, and they talk about how to craft a better interface, which is important. But this is where I also think this is such a fascinating idea, just how teams work and the psychology of teamwork and the psychology of how people lead and how people follow and the influence, as it relates to taking those ideas that you have to make a better experience. And you might think like this is the best thing for the user. And often the best thing for the user is the best thing for the business, because if it's not good for the user, they're not going to pay. But the disconnect comes from people who are not designers, who don't necessarily understand that and say, just like, throw this thing in there, put that button in there, whatever. And it's your job.
Order doesn't matter. Just do it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's your job to convince those non-designers how that positive benefit for the users will impact in a positive way the business. But often you would think those stakeholders, those executives, those product managers, whomever would know that instinctually, but they often don't. And, that's again how humans work, like that's just the way humans work. They know their thing. They know their thing really well. And they just assume everyone else knows the thing that like they do. And then designers do the same thing. We assume everyone knows the same thing we do, but they often don't. And so it's our job to influence and use some of these psychological principles, some of these psychology principles to influence those people on, the benefits to the users and how that will impact the business.
And
I find that like really fascinating. And storytelling. So I find that like super fascinating. So I want to go back a minute. You mentioned something earlier, and I want to kind of dig into this a little bit, because I'm not really familiar with this, and I think this is really fascinating. As somebody who's been more of on the the internal IT enterprise software side of the business for a long time, I'm never really designing with faces. And, I don't really need to use any faces or anything like that. It's more about data grids and things like that. I want to dig into that a little bit. You mentioned the importance of faces. And there's a lot of people out there that are going to be designing, especially maybe they're a startup. They're designing commercial apps. And once you get in the app, you might not have many faces. But I'm thinking about like from the marketing side, the marketing site, a lot of times the UX designers are also designing those sites as well. And so talk to me a little bit about the importance of faces, because this is fascinating to me, something I don't really know anything about. What tell me about that.
Sure. There was a famous study that was done, man, I don't even know, 2010, I want to say. And it was about eye tracking. And I know we don't do a ton of eye tracking anymore. There's ways we can kind of figure it out. And there's new software. I just saw, I ran a test, and now I can't remember the name of the company, but I could load up some images with some UI, and it would tell me where eye tracking would land, and, like how people read, right? So these things are all kind of tied together.
Like using AI though, like not using real people.
Yes, using AI. So use AI to show what typical eye tracking would be on whatever design you've uploaded is fascinating. But the thing is that let's go back to this famous study that was done, and it was done with babies, right? And that there's two ads. Right. The one ad, this cute, chubby little baby in a diaper is just sitting there looking straight at the camera. Right. It's super compelling. People, especially women, we are like, oh, cute baby, and even a lot of guys like, oh, cute baby. But what was really interesting was when they did the eye tracking study, everybody focused on the baby's face. Right. So this ad had a baby, and then it had copy next to it, right? So think about a big banner, right, on your hero banner on your website. Well, the next study was the baby looking at the copy. And everybody, you can look at the eye tracking software, they kind of looked at the baby first, and then they looked right at wherever the baby was looking. And then they started to do a lot more tests. And it turns out that we want to see what others are seeing, right? We want to look at where they're looking. So you can even kind of you've probably had this happen where you've been in a meeting and somebody will go, right? And you
Everybody
instantly
looks, yeah.
turn around, you're like, "Oh, what are you looking at?" Right? You're curious. You want to know. And so you'll look and it believe it or not, it works even when it's just a static thing. It's just one of those instinctual things that we do. We want to look at what people are looking at. And if that person you like has emotion on their face, right? We feel that emotion. Like humans are such empathetic beings. We don't realize how much we actually empathize with each other. And in the digital world where we have this screen in between, we do lose a little bit of that. And so we have to be a little more intentional with each other and how we work together, how we talk together. Like my team, we have cameras on. We do, like we team huddle. Everybody got to have their camera on because I need to look at your face. I need to see the expressions. I need to understand what are you telling me when you're not speaking, right? And so I need as a manager and a leader to understand what are you thinking? What are you feeling? How can I help guide this conversation if that's what needs to happen or how do I let you take the stage? And those things are all tied together.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and it's again, it's like humans are fundamentally animals, and we want to be part of a group. We want to fit in. We want to be part of the pack. We don't want to miss out. And that the baby study is really interesting, and it's interesting that you mentioned a couple times that I've mentioned as well, like studies that were done 10, 15 years ago. And the thing that I love about this idea is that, these studies, humans don't evolve in 10 years and we don't change
No,
the
where
way
they're
our
just
brains
as
work.
relevant
It's just,
today.
these are
Exactly.
just as relevant today. Studies that, and this is something that I think a lot of people, especially with like the internet nowadays, they forget that there's a wealth of knowledge in research papers that were written 50, 60, sometimes even 100 or more years ago. They are still often very valid. Now, some of the, maybe you could argue 150 years ago, the testing may not be as rigorous as it may be today. But, a lot of people have taken those studies and redone the experiment over and shown that they are true. And, there's so many like articles written and you could go on Medium and find 1,000 things. But what I would urge a lot of people to do is instead of going to find the Medium article about the research paper, go find the research
Find the research paper. Yeah.
Find the research paper and read it. And you could go to Google Scholar and find some stuff on there. And a lot of them you have to pay to read, but there's tons of PDFs that you can download and read the entire article. So many people, I think, will just go and they'll find the summary of the research paper and they'll make their own assumptions based on someone else's opinion of the paper, but go read the actual paper. It's really fascinating. Some of these
There's been so many
research papers are
books
awesome.
written about it too, even specifically for UX, right? There are books about the psychology of design, like Susan Weincheck. She's amazing. She wrote a book called 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People. And her book, there were a lot of things I'd already known, right? Especially about faces, a lot of stuff I'd already kind of tested and learned about. She talks a lot about like proximity and all that kind of stuff too, and Gestalt. But her book, man, I was like, oh, I'm going to read this on the plane. And I sucked that book in and just like, and it was done. It was like, I have to read it again. It was so good. And she's done a lot of research and she's a psychologist and her book was astounding for me. So, and it had just been recommended by another designer. Oh yeah, you might want to read this book. I know you like psychology and design, so you should try this out. So I loved it.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I love that. And yeah, I think there's just so much stuff online that you can go and find it, and I love it. And you could learn a lot of this trial and error on your own, but find the research papers. I'm telling you, like I recommend everybody like go find research papers. I do, like I mentioned, the cognition catalog. I do every week. Well, I haven't done it in like a few weeks because I've been slacking, but I always try to find like the research papers and link to the free research paper with like the PDF if I can find it. More often than not, they are available. It's just a matter of like doing a little bit of digging. And Google Scholar, if you have not, anybody listening has not gone to Google Scholar, it's amazing the amount of stuff that is available on the internet if you just go and look. And some of that stuff is not even on, I've found at least, doesn't come up on a simple Google search. Like you've got to go to Google Scholar and actually find it. So anyway, so you mentioned the Gestalt principles a second ago, and I want to dig into that a little bit because like this is something I think a lot of people, when they think about, especially career shifters, for instance, like they will come from another career and they'll try to do X design. And what I hear a lot of these people that have come from other businesses, especially non-design roles, is the visual design skills are always the ones that are lacking. And what's really interesting, and I've worked with a boot camp for a long time, and the thing that I see often, which just blows my mind, is a lot of these designers will start designing and they will say, I want to be original. I want to design my own thing. And then they will just put a bunch of crap on a screen, and it is possibly like the worst thing I've ever seen. The visuals are awful. The hierarchy is terrible. Spacing is off. Sizing is disproportionate, and everything is terrible. And what I love about design, visual design especially, is there are a lot of rules and things. And specifically, I think the Gestalt principles apply across the board. And that really, like, if you follow this principle, then they'll make really great design. That's my personal opinion. And it's a matter of just learning the skill, just like any other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gestalt principles and get your thoughts on that. This is some of the like most fascinating things I think about design and psychology.
And you know, it's funny, you talk about how they don't teach that stuff in boot camp. So I volunteered for UXPA Minnesota, and we had a Learn Figma class. And I was like, hey, why are we learning so much about all these, like, why? Color, typography, this is basic. Like, but we're trying to teach Figma here. This is basic design. You should know this. Because I come from a real strong design background, right? So to me, it was like, oh, well, these are opening stakes in the game, right? And I was really surprised to learn that they don't teach any of these principles in a lot of places. And I sat in this meeting like with a mouth open. I was like, how is that possible? You need all these things. They're so important to UX. And so it was kind of like, ooh, mind blown. But you're right. They don't teach some of these principles. And I think for those of us who design just kind of comes naturally, your talent or whatever you want to, just your mind kind of instinctually does it this way. But you don't have to have that, you can learn it, right? Because there are principles, and once you apply those principles, you can create good design without having a lick of talent, as long as you know what those rules are, right? That is the talent, right? It's whether you've learned it or you just kind of, it came to you in a vision. I don't know. So either way, you can do that. And it's funny to me because I realized that Sesame Street, of all things, Sesame Street tried to teach us this when we were kids, right? You guys remember one of those things is not like the other. That's teaching you some of the pattern, and pattern recognition is so important. So if you want one thing to stick out, you create these patterns, and that one thing is really different. And that's what everybody's going to focus on because Bert and Ernie told me so, like that. I learned it from Sesame Street. I didn't realize that was a design principle, right? And then how I'm grouping things together, that also has my brain, oh, these things go together. And it's amazing because when you have bad design, you get confused because your brain if stuff is close together, your brain is trying to put it together. And it's like, what? I don't understand. But it's because two things that are not related work too close to each other, right? And you're just getting that running, and your brain can't pick up that pattern because for most all of us, patterns drive so much. Even like letters in the language, that's a pattern. And even if the letters aren't quite in the right order, we can still read it because our brain is actually picking up the pattern.
Yeah. And, this is the other thing, too. I see this a lot with even things like resumes, like applying Gestalt principles to resumes. Like, for instance, I'll see people that will put bullet points, right? And they'll, a lot of times, like the bullet points in their experience will have two rows and 2 lines. And then they'll have another bullet point that is the same distance between as the 2 lines were in the previous one. And so, like, it's impossible for me to skim because those bullets should be apart, right? And so like the stuff like that, even as a designer, to me, this is like, you should be applying these principles to things like your resume, right? And if you're trying to get a job, and I see this, I read a lot of resumes, I do a lot of coaching, and I see this, and this is like the first thing I call out. It's like, you're making it impossible for a hiring manager to skim your resume, and you're making it really hard for them to take in this information, and they've got 30 seconds, and you're making it very difficult for them to digest the information.
Let's pause there for just a second because you said the magic word, skim. Right? Let's talk about it because people are reading differently today, right? We often joke as designers, "Oh, people don't read." But it's true. We don't read, we skim. And so when you're thinking about content, right? Content is a big part of all your design. You need to make sure that your content is skimmable and parsable, right? So what you said is 100% on. You need to just kind of hit the highlights, right? And the other thing about psychology is people read in an F pattern, right? So think about the big letter F, put it on whatever thing that you're going to design because that is how people read. And they're just going to glance at stuff. And the deeper we get into technology, I feel, and the more we are heads down on all our devices and we're constantly in this digital world, right? The more you're in the digital world, the less you read because you're looking for all these other clues around what it is, right? So like if I were to do like a PDP or like a product detail page, right? And I just had the word reviews, it'll get skipped more than if I had the little star icons and then the word reviews because people are picking up patterns and they're not reading. They're just kind of skimming. Or if I have a sentence there that says, read our reviews instead of just the single word reviews, it won't get read. So I think skimmable and parsable, that's really important because we have to step back and remember that words are now visual items that are going to get looked at, and they're going to get looked at just as if it were an icon.
All right, UX fam, it is time for another mid-roll sponsor break. Let's hear it from our sponsor this week, Wix Studio. Okay, web designers, let's talk about the C word, creative burnout. Your client site has real portfolio potential, but between resourcing, feedback, tight budgets, and even tighter deadlines, it just doesn't make the cut. Wix Studio helps close that gap. Built for agencies and enterprises, you can bring your vision to life and keep it alive. With no-code animations, tons of AI tools, reusable design assets, and advanced layout tools. For your next project, check out wixstudio.com. That's wixstudio.com. And now, back to the show. I feel this is, if I could just give advice to anybody out there who's like learning design, and you feel like you're bad at visual design, it's a skill. It is a skill like any other skill, and you can learn that skill, but you've got to, don't just copy for the sake of copying. I see that a lot of people will do that too. They'll go and they'll say, oh, I'm just going to design what Apple did, but like understand why Apple did
Why is it good?
the thing that they did. Why does everyone think Apple is so amazing? Why does everyone think old brown stuff is so amazing, right? I mean, don't just copy for the sake of copying. Go and like understand why they did it and the reasoning behind it. And I would even often say, go further, go a step back and find out who inspired them, and what did they like and why did they like those things so much to want to try to emulate it? This is something I used to play music, and this is sort of a similar thing, I think, but I used to play music, and my drum teacher when I was a kid would say, what's your favorite band? And what drummer do you want to be like? And I would say, like Lars Ulrich from Metallica or something. And they're like, all right, you could try to be like Lars, but who did Lars emulate? Like, why did Lars become a drummer? Find that person, and then go back and find that person. And why did they become a drummer? And so, that's kind of the thing. I think a lot of times I was having a really great conversation with somebody a while ago, Bob Baxley, actually, from, I don't know if you know him, he's design leader. I think he worked at Apple. But one of the things he was saying, and I need to get him on the show, actually. Anyway, one of the things he was saying was, designers don't really understand the sort of greats of design anymore. Like people just become a designer because they see some TikTok video. But they don't appreciate the greats like we would do for musicians or something, and go back and like understand who inspired those designers and why did they become designers and what inspired them, and try to emulate the principles that they use as opposed to just copying their designs. And I always that has less to do with psychology, I think, but it's still like really fascinating to think about. I don't think a lot of people do that.
Well, one of the things when I'm talking to newer designers, and especially those who are going into UX that don't have a lot of visual design skills, right? Like I've been asked, well, how do you get visual design skills? And I said, you know what? Go to all your favorite websites, right? Take some screenshots, print them out, maybe even if you just have to hold something, right? But really look at that design and start making a list. What is it about this design that you like? And then I want you to think about, why do you like it? What is it about it that you like? Because we don't always think deeply into the why. And I think that's what psychology is about, right? Understanding the why. Why? Why did somebody not log into my thing? It was so beautifully designed. Well, because they felt like they were being watched and like maybe even judged. Like, why isn't somebody clicking on this thing? Well, maybe we had a face that was looking away, and so they looked away and then they got distracted because squirrel. You really need to think about the why. And the tough thing about A/B testing and the tough thing about test and learn is you get an answer, but you may not always get the why, right? So when you're doing research, especially if it's super quantitative research, you don't get the why. When you do qualitative, you're talking to somebody, you can actually get a why, which is great, but your sample sizes are so much smaller, right? So, but understanding those whys are what are going to give you those intuitive leaps into that next, yes, this is perfect. This is exactly what I needed kind of moments.
Love that. Yeah, that's a really great way to look at this too. It's like the psychology is just don't think of it as like science, or I don't know, you need a master's degree or you need a doctorate to understand these things. Because I think some people you might argue that you might for certain things, but I think to be a designer, you don't need a master's degree or a doctorate in psychology, but you do need to just be curious enough to ask that question. Why?
Yeah, yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
that's a great way to put it. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to move on a little bit to the
Yeah.
next topic, which was storytelling and the psychology specifically behind storytelling and why humans love a good story. And what does that actually mean to you when you say storytelling? It's sort of become a buzzword.
Yeah, I mean, it really has become a buzzword. In fact, it's funny. That has been I try and pick things I want to learn more about in, some sort of topic I want to deeper dive into. And this past year, it's really been about storytelling. But what's interesting is we as humans, we're wired for storytelling. We learned, like before we had written history and before we had to sit in a class and look at a stupid book and listen to a lecture, we had storytelling, and we there are a lot of cultures where storytelling is the way they transferred knowledge to the young, right? So I had a really interesting growing up background that was kind of steeped in a lot of Native American rituals and stories and way of life, and so much of their culture is about storytelling. And it's how they teach their kids morals. It's how they talk about the what happened in the past. And it's not just, hey, so and so did this thing in 1880 whatever or 15 who cares. It's there's always a deeper story to it too, right? It's not, and it's important. So we are wired for it, and it's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. I want you to think about when you were taking classes, right? Whether it was college or maybe just a side lecture or even sometimes high school. When you were doing that and it was something you were really interested in learning about, think about all the things that are happening around you, right? So you've got somebody speaking. There's usually a presentation or something up on the wall or something on the computer that you're also reading, right? And then if it's something like when I was in college, you had to take notes, right? So you're hearing, you're seeing, and you're writing, right? And those three things are happening all at the same time. And that is how it's getting deeper and deeper into your mind, right? So that's all part of storytelling, right? Now I have like a ton of different story frameworks, right? It's, I have my plus one where it's like state, structure, solve, sell. That's great. I have another one where I use for presentations, right? So when I'm trying to present a design that's going to be maybe a little bit more high effort than we want, but I really think it's the right thing to do, I pivot how I tell my story. I start with the good. I let the cat right out of the bag first thing. I'm like, this is what the world could look like if we did it this way. And then I go, and here are some of our obstacles, right? Because a good story always has obstacles. But then here's the proof of why this is possible. And here's the research I maybe have done. And here's why I think this really awesome thing is going to be the right solution. And when we tell stories in the right way, that's how we're getting projects done. And that's how we can get some of those little extra things. It's all about how are we telling that story and how persuasive can we be in that story?
Yeah, I love that. And just, again, like thinking about psychology and human brains and how they function. And we talked a minute ago about some of these research studies are 50 years old, but they're still valid today.
Sigmund Freud is still valid today,
Right,
even though he was a
exactly.
little bit of a quackpot. I mean,
yeah, 100 years ago. But I mean, you think about like, the human history, right? We're like the humans have been around 300,000 years or so. And we have evolved over, however many years, 300,000 years or so. And just in the last 2,000, we've had writing. So like over those 300,000 years, stories, we've evolved to remember not facts and figures and dates and lists of bullet, facts like you mentioned. We've evolved to remember things from those compelling stories, And so, just in the last, 400, 500 years, 1500s, Gutenberg, I guess, invented the printing movable type, whatever it was. That is not enough time for humans to have evolved to just memorize these facts and figures. And so, like, we are still these animals that have evolved to tell stories and pass information down through oral history. That is how our brains work. And, to fight against that and to say that storytelling isn't important or storytelling isn't a valid thing for us to, use to sell something. And I would even argue you could use that term to sell if you're like trying to influence stakeholders, sell an idea to stakeholders or executives or, that is how humans work. It doesn't matter how much education they have, how many years of experience they have, how much power and authority they have. Their human brain functions just like everyone else's. And, they might think differently, they might act differently, but there's that instinctual bit that is still there that I think is just so incredibly important. When you think about storytelling, I'm curious, do you have any like resources, things that you find useful that you may want to share as far as like helping other people?
well, it's interesting. This is why podcasts are so prevalent these days. Listening to something actually penetrates a different part of your brain more so than like TV. And so I've sometimes will just not watch TV. I'll listen to TV. But there's another podcast that I love to watch. It's called Dive.
Mike Ridda, he's actually going to be on the show in a month or so.
Oh, really? I love Rid.
Yeah.
So he's always got a good show. I love like I can put his show on in the background and I don't have to watch the interview part. I can just listen and it activates a different part of your brain. And hearing that, a lot of people listen to stories while they're driving and that sort of thing. I can't because I get so deep into a story. I need to concentrate on my driving. I can't. But, storytelling has always been so important to me and I read a ton. I love reading. So my brain gets super lit up by reading words. I have a really great imagination, so reading for me has always been great. I just finished reading this really amazing book called Bending Reality by Victoria Song, and it's got a lot of woo-woo in it, but she's an amazing writer, and she really kind of makes you stop and think because she kind of blends some of the woo-woo stuff with science. And this is why it's working in your brain, right? So, and as a designer, that's where inspiration for me has always kind of come. I'll park an idea. I'll say, okay, brain, think about it for a little while. I need an answer. Give me something later. And it'll just marinate there in the background. And then my brain will go, hey, I got an idea. So those things all kind of tie together with storytelling for me.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I love about Rid's show too is He does a great job of storytelling. So if you're listening,
Mhm.
you get that sort of, it's like, it's not exactly the same, but I think Rid does a really great job of producing Dive in a similar way that like This American Life and Radiolab kind of do it, where it's not a conversation like this, for instance. It's just like one long conversation. We'll edit it and stuff, but they'll mix in sound and multiple people talking and all that stuff. And Rid does that as well. And he does that on the audio side. And it's really great, like audio storytelling. But then he also does just a fantastic job. If you watch his YouTube videos, the
Yeah.
videos are great. And he does like B-rolls and cuts and all that stuff. I don't know how he does it. I don't know where he finds the time to do it. But yeah, his show is awesome. It's one of my it's one of my favorite UX podcasts for sure. Or just design podcasts in general. Does a great job of that. So I want to talk a little bit about the storytelling as it relates to like practical applications at work. And you mentioned a little bit ago, the like, different frameworks and stuff. What are your thoughts there about taking some of that storytelling and helping to influence your team to do a certain thing? We talked a little bit about this earlier. Let's dig into that a little bit more. Do you have like a certain method or what are your thoughts there about how to use storytelling to influence those people on your team, not necessarily users?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have a few frameworks that I like to use. So you're kind of talking about like how do you set up like
Yeah, it could be even just like in an email, I think like a lot of times people will just, list a bunch of crap in an email and somebody will reply with the very first bullet. They'll ignore the rest because it wasn't, they didn't want to read it, or a memo or even a DM or a presentation or something like that. And I'm just curious how you.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I started front loading. I was having a conversation with a UX writer that I work with, and we were talking about silly things like a PDP, right? Product detail page. And because of the way people read, and people read emails the same way, they read job specs, they read presentation deck. Everybody reads the same way these days. And you're really kind of only grabbing a few words. So I would say start by front loading the really important stuff first. So if you're crafting an email, right? And I say crafting because sometimes you have to, I sometimes will sit and I will work on an email. I'm not a bang it out and send kind of person. I like to think about what it is that I'm going to say. And if you're upset, maybe you have a little too much emotion about whatever it is that you're writing. One of the things I've started doing is throwing it into ChatGPT and say, give me the tone and tell me how to help refine some of this so that it's less, if I'm already in a kind of mood, So, but I would say front load your important things because whatever you say first in a sentence or whatever, that's what people are going to listen to. And then I would also say take yourself out as much as you can. And by that, I mean, don't say I all the time. Think about like I had a manager once tell me, she goes, Mara, you have such great things to say, and you always have great data to back up what it is that you're talking about. But you always start a sentence with, I think. And she goes, the shooting yourself in the foot. Like, so we need to stop. We take yourself out. She's like, I said, every time you write an email or a report or do whatever, I want you to look through it and figure out the way to take out the I and never use the word think. Because especially when you are, sometimes we soften things that we're trying to, hey, I think blah, blah, blah. And so, because we don't want people to be like, ugh, but we need to take those words out and bring the data in, right? Talk about that, structure it so that the important thing is first and take yourself out of the, make the I go away. Be a we if you're a team, right? Don't say I and a bunch of stuff if you're a team. And I think those things have really kind of helped me speak from a more like I don't want to say authoritative, but a more confident point of view. People take me more seriously.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I actually, and this is again, I think one of my favorite books, but Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards.
Hmm.
Have you ever read this book?
Mm-mm.
I need to get her on the show. She's probably too popular now to come on the show. I should have got her on the show, but before anyone else knew about her. But anyway, it's all about the psychology of how we interact with people and the hidden cues that we give off using our body language and the way we speak. And it's about how people interpret that and then, judge us either fairly or unfairly.
100%.
And it's interesting you mentioned this, and Vanessa talks about this in her book, but you mentioned, the I think, and a lot of times like women in the corporate environment will try to, because I'm sure you've experienced this as a woman. I'm sure my wife has as well. But, women, you're too bossy. You need to be, lighten up, loosen up, smile a little, that kind of stuff. And so a lot of times women will try to I guess, what's the right word? They'll try to make themselves feel less authoritative, aggressive, right? And so they'll say like, I think, or they'll say, you know what I mean? Or they'll end
I
sentences like
will.
that.
I have gotten coaching from bosses that have said, you're too aggressive. You have tone. You have, and it's like, what? But I've listened to a lot of my male counterparts and I'm like, not different. I'm not saying this differently. My voice, I have a strong voice and I have strong opinions too. So my dad did not raise me as some little wimpy girl. Like, he
Yeah.
gave me a screwdriver and taught me how to use it,
Mhm.
and so and I grew up, my dad mentored kids, he mentored young boys, and so I grew up in a garage full of teenage boys. I had to compete with teenage boys my whole life. So for me, like I struggled in that corporate environment, and the getting the coaches on, oh, you're so aggressive, or oh, you have tone. And it's made me speak differently. And then I had this other boss and she was like, okay, now you've softened too much. Now you're coming from a position of weakness and you need to be strong, but you still need to do so without being a bitch, right? So women, we get that a lot. Oh, you're such a bitch. And so I even have a ring. It says be kind on the one side, and on the inside of the ring, it says of a bitch. But it
I love
helps
that.
me to kind of, yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Be kind, be kind, be kind. And keep the bitch on the inside, right?
Uh-huh.
So I've learned how to rephrase some of my stuff and restructure my stuff. But data is important. I've always been a very data led person. All of the decisions that I make in my design come from research. They come from looking at full story or, Google Analytics and looking at all this data and saying, okay, users are struggling with this XYZ thing here. I can see the pattern in full story, or I'm watching all this data and we're getting huge drop off here in Google Analytics tells me a story, right? So talking about data, telling a data story, right? Nobody remembers data, but they will remember your story and how you say it, right? So they're not going to really remember what all the numbers are. So if you can wrap that up in a story and you can make it not about you, it's going to be hugely impactful.
I love that. It's definitely something to think about. And as a man, I feel like a lot of that stuff that we talked about a second ago, we feel, I don't know, often like, well, I'm just saying my stuff, whatever. But like, I feel like women, and you probably know this, like they've got to think about how the men on the other side of that conference table are perceiving them, which is something that, again, thinking about psychology,
Yeah.
it's something like a man never has to worry about.
No,
And
especially a white man.
yeah, and it's fascinating and also disappointing, and it's kind of sad that there's, the psychology aspect is something that women, even minorities, like you mentioned, have to think about when they are talking to people in a meeting, and it blows my mind, and that alone is probably an entire topic for another day.
Here's an interesting stat for you. In a group split evenly between men and women, if women dominate the conversation 25% of the time, men will perceive it as they ruled the conversation for more than half of the time. That is how men perceive it, even if technically it's only 25% of the conversation.
That's funny. So, like, if you ask them afterwards, like, how much of this did you talk? They'll say, "Oh, I talked 50% of the time."
Yeah. They'll
That's
say
interesting.
if women dominate the conversation for around 25 to 30%, men will perceive that as over half. So how you
Oh,
perceive
they will perceive the women as talking for
they
more
will
than half the
perceive the
time.
women as
Ah,
talking
oh,
more
I see.
than, yeah.
Okay.
So it's interesting how, there's psychology in that too, right? Like how things are perceived may not match what the actual words are, right? So, and just remember, I often remember, especially when I'm doing research, because I'm like, "Ugh, it's right there. Did you not click it?" They didn't see it. They didn't read it. And we have to keep those things in mind when we're designing, right? The people aren't going to see it. They're not going to read it. And just because they read it doesn't mean they comprehended it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
They saw the words. They recognized the letters.
Yeah.
Didn't understand what it meant.
Yeah, didn't actually click. I love that. All right, so before we get out of here, I want to talk about the ethical implications. And we talked a little bit about dark and deceptive patterns a minute ago. But obviously, this all can be used for good to help improve things. It can also be used to, negatively impact users and promote that business need, like we said, at the expense. And you hear a lot of times growth designers are dinged for this kind of thing where they will use these types of deceptive patterns to increase that metric at the, expense of the long-term growth of the company because they were chasing that short-term metric. So I'm curious, thinking about all this stuff, what are your thoughts on deceptive patterns and how do you go about mitigating this and making sure we don't take advantage of it?
I'm going to tell you from experience that it's tough to sometimes recognize that what you're doing isn't great. Like I worked for a subscription service and I was just trying to get people through the flow and trying to help them through the flow and to get them to subscribe. And, when you're first doing, you're like, oh yeah, okay, this tested well and this did well. But then you have to also take a step back and, put yourself in that other person's shoes and understand like what does this actually mean? And that is so hard sometimes. I took there is actually some classes on LinkedIn around dark patterning and they're really interesting and being able to recognize it. I think sometimes you just have to take a step back from your design and go, is this the right thing to do? And that's hard, especially when you're being pressured from a boss or a manager or, a product person to just do it and get it. And we need to nail these KPIs. And this is so important. And this is key to our business. But, like with subscription, we took away the ability to cancel online because if you had to call,
Less likely to cancel.
you're less likely to cancel. And if you have to wait on hold, you're less likely to cancel. To me, that's where I started having to draw the line. I was like, that's not right. That's not ethical. Like we're not endearing ourselves to people. Like maybe somebody has to cancel in the moment, but they don't want to, and they want to be able to come back. We need to make these things easy for them because it does our brand better in the long run, right? And a lot, I think you nailed it when you said people are often trying to chase a short-term goal and they're missing the long-term goal, right? And, there's a lot to be said to the philosophy of that long-term payoff, right? Acquiring a customer you already have is so much less money than acquiring a brand new customer. And I think sometimes business misses that and they don't think about that top of the funnel piece. And if you're not capturing them and keeping them as they're hitting that bottom of the funnel, you're missing opportunities and you're hurting yourself in the long run, right?
Yeah. And again, like you're just sort of tying that all back to psychology, right? Like humans remember those things. They remember that pain that you put them through. And a while back, I had Emily Anderson come on the show and we talked about a little bit about this and how, her grandfather passed away and they had to cancel subscriptions. And the way that they treated her grandmother has made her and her entire family never want to use that service again.
Right.
And, like that kind of stuff, like I think it's just you're chasing these metrics. And I think it's really important to understand how humans behave and how they think, because these things that are getting you these short-term goals in the short term are killing your long-term growth because people no longer trust you. They feel like they've been violated in some way. They feel like they've been wronged in some way. And just like you said, it's easier to get a customer that you've already had than it is to get a new one. And I think a lot of times people forget about that completely. And that is just something to think about. And it's interesting you mentioned, the whole, again, I think this plays into the psychology of how humans work. But when you're in the moment and you're doing those things, we often don't even realize that the things that we're doing are bad or wrong or deceptive. And I think it's important for us to kind of take a step back and analyze some of these things. We can get a second opinion, outside opinion about some of these things. People who have no concept of the work, who have, no invested interest in and spent time and money and effort getting that thing designed or built. Somebody from another team, another department, and get them to kind of think about it. And, that's just something I think, anyway, I find that kind of stuff incredibly fascinating. Deceptive patterns are easy to fall for, and I think a lot of us do it without even realizing it.
Well, the other thing I'm going to remind people of is bring it back to your mission, right? So if you ever question, what am I doing the right thing, right? And we want to you want to think about mission driven. My cousin just started a business actually about mission driven work, and when you don't have a regular KPI, right? Bring it back to the mission. And I feel like this is important, like know your company's mission. Right? What is it you guys are trying to do? And is the pattern that you're designing and the thing that you're designing, does that still align to that mission? And if the answer is no, then what you're doing is not right. And you need to take a step back and rethink what it is that you've done. And we all need to sometimes step back and say, does this still align with what we're here to stand for?
I love that. All right. So we have had you for a little while now. And before we get out of here, I've got some questions I'd like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. Before we do that, any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you feel is important to discuss?
Yeah, man, we talked about a lot of stuff today.
We did.
I would just say do some research. Research is really important. Get into, read a little bit about psychology. I guess I geek out on this stuff so much. It's so important to me. So learn about it. Pick up some books. Just kind of explore a little. I think understanding psychology a little bit, even just a little bit, will help you be a better designer.
Hell yeah. All right. And if you've got any resources or anything like that you'd like to link to, let me know. We can put it in the show notes for everybody to check it out. And you've got a presentation that you do, a talk that you give, that you talk a lot about this. We're going to link to that. We didn't talk about that too much today, but a lot of the principles that we talked about in the conversation you have in that talk that you give. So if you've got, if you have a recording of that too, you giving the talk, we can link to the deck. But if you have a recording of that, I'd love to put that in the show notes as well. All right. So Mara, we've got, like I said, 5 questions I'd like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Non-design book. Man, Dare to Lead.
Dare to Lead. Okay.
Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. She is an amazing human. So anything Brené Brown is a phenomenal read. Dare to Lead, I think, changed how I show up as a leader.
Brené Brown's awesome. We've got, I think it was Brené Brown, We Can Do Hard Things. That's one that we try to talk about to our kids all the time because they're all, I can't, like, you can do hard things. Anyway, I love that. It's a good book too. Brené Brown, awesome read. Check it out. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
Man, I honestly don't do podcasts that aren't design. All the stuff I listen to is design focused, to be just honest. But like I said, I listen to some TV shows.
That counts. YouTube or something. Yeah, that counts.
That sort of thing. Yeah, my husband and I are really into Dexter at the moment.
Dexter? I never did get into Dexter. And it's on Showtime, right? So now it's like an extra subscription.
Yeah, it's on Paramount Plus, I think.
Paramount Plus, but you got to pay extra.
Yeah, probably. We pay because, he wanted to have Yellowstone, so.
Right on. Yeah, I got Paramount Plus so I could watch Star Trek. So
all the Star Trek stuff is phenomenal too. Yep.
I still haven't even caught up. They've got so many shows now. I'm
truly
so far behind.
The Picard episode, the Picard series was phenomenal, though. I loved it.
Yeah, I never did get to finish it. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I got it for Paramount Plus to watch Star Trek, and then my kids found all the Nickelodeon stuff. So, all right, next up, what is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something you've had at a restaurant, vacation spot, whatever.
We cook it ourselves. My husband's kind of a grill meister. We do filet mignon and asparagus on the grill. And that is my favorite, bar none.
Hell yeah. You know what? When I try to grill filet mignon, it just ends up like, it's beyond rare. It's like, it's so thick.
Here's my tip.
I can't ever get
Here's
it like
my tip
rare.
For the perfect steak. We do a little bit of Lowry seasoned salt.
Okay.
Olive oil, and sometimes a little garlic powder. Or not the garlic salt. You already got the Lowry salt. You don't salt too much, but your grill needs to be screaming hot. Like I put it on the highest setting. Like my grill is usually 600-700 degrees. And then if your steak is about an inch thick, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, done. But always have a temp gauge too.
Yeah. That's the thing. I'm not putting it on a grill. I try to like sear it in a pan, like a cast iron skillet, and it's not hot enough and it doesn't have the ambient heat. So it's like, it just comes out like basically like raw. Like the quarter inch on each side is like cooked, and then the inside is like,
So
like
if you like cooking in the house, the way to do it is you can get your pan screaming hot on the stove, right? And then you want your burner setting on high. And then it's 2 and then bake it
oven,
at
yeah,
like
okay.
350 for 10 minutes.
Put a couple pads of butter on top before you throw it in the oven. That's how I ended up figuring out. So with the grill, I don't know. I tried to grill filet mignon. I completely ruined it. Like expensive steak. It was just terrible. I had to like cut it in half and ended up just being like well done. It wasn't good. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Not for what I paid for those freaking steaks.
It's cheaper at Costco.
Yeah, I guess I got to do that. I don't know. You get your fillets in bulk though.
Yeah,
I
well,
put them in the freezer. I don't know why not.
you can buy a whole entire actual fillet
Oh, cut it yourself. Oh wow,
and
Jesus.
cut it yourself, and then you can cut them as thick as you want.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a smart move. Yeah, invest your bonus money on
Yeah, right.
an entire fillet. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
My favorite vacation spot, this is tough because I have two. My first favorite vacation spot is the Cayman Islands. My husband and I go there every single year and we go diving. We go to the east end of the island in Cayman on Grand Cayman. And it's a phenomenal experience. Being underwater terrified me when I first learned how to dive. But there's something really serene about diving, and it's beautiful and it's relaxing and yet a lot of work. It's thrilling and calming at the same time. So I love to dive. Cayman has some of the best diving in the world. My other favorite place is Utah. And in fact, we're going there this coming Friday. My dad's family are all from Utah. I come from strong Mormon background, but
Okay. I was with the name like Thorsrud. I assumed you were like born and raised in.
Oh yeah, no, my
Michigan,
husband's last name is Thorsrud. So my family,
Oh right, okay.
we're actually Scots. So my maiden name was
Okay.
Fraser, and my great grandfather helped build the tabernacle. So
No way. Okay, interesting.
yeah, so my grandfather was the black sheep and he escaped and was like, "Yep, you guys, I'm out."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so Utah is one of my favorite places to go. We're going on our motorcycles and I can't be more excited. I've not done Utah on the back of a motorcycle yet.
Oh,
And
that sounds fun.
I'm
Yeah.
absolutely thrilled to go and ride some of these things that I have found challenging and exciting in a minivan. I now get to experience on the back of my motorcycle.
Oh, nice.
So I'm really pumped for this trip.
Right on. Well, Cayman Islands and Utah, two very different places, but beautiful in
Yes.
their own right, I'm sure. I've never been to either.
I highly recommend both. I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker, I guess.
Right on. I love it. All right. Last up, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Don't tell anybody at
Okay,
Adobe,
nobody will hear it.
but it's Canva.
Canva. Oh no. No, I'm kidding. I won't tell. No one will know. No one. It'll be a little secret.
I've really started to love Canva. They have so many different tools that you can use and create. They make it creating easy. And I love it because it saves me so much time. I can throw presentations together like boom, and they look so good. They just have some really wonderful tools. Otherwise, Adobe actually has some really good AI products right now. Their Adobe Firefly, which is browser based, is really phenomenal if you're looking to get into AI art. Their prompting is fantastic. We're doing some I don't want to say prototyping work, but we're doing some investigative work through Estée Lauder with them on creating images so that we don't have to always do photo shoots and creating AI. And we have really strong rules around what we can and cannot do. So a lot of what we're doing is like the little makeup smudges and, like pools of liquids and that sort of thing. So that's really cool that we can really take one photo and then make all these different assets out of it with AI. I think that's really interesting. But what I love about the Adobe Firefly is the ethics that they have around how they developed their AI. They didn't train any of their AI on stuff that was not paid. They used stock that was all done from that they had paid for. And their ethical practices are very high around their AI. And so every time someone is like, "Oh, I use Midjourney," I'm like, because Midjourney didn't do the same level of ethics that Adobe has. Although Adobe is charging me way too much money. I will.
Yeah. Well, I
If
was
you're
going to say,
listening, anybody at Adobe, I need that price to come down. It's stupid.
I was just going to say they could afford to pay for all that stuff at $700 something a year per
I'm
license.
paying like $80 a month for a subscription. I use like 3 things.
So I use Audition, Photoshop, Illustrator, and I was thinking I would do Premiere Pro for like videos, but that's too much for me.
I had to put some videos together for Aveda, and we were things were just absolutely crazy, and I had to emergency learn Premiere Pro.
Yeah.
So that I could put some touts together
easy.
for a web page we were designing. And I was just like, oh.
Here's a little tip for you or anyone listening. I waited until Black Friday and I got half off, right? And then you wait a year, and then the next year, you're not supposed to use your email again because that discount's only good for a year. So you say you're going to cancel. And then when you say you're going to cancel, then they offer you the half off discount. Yeah. Or you just create a new Gmail account and use that. That's how you get the...
They only offer that discount the one time.
Well, that's if you say you're going to cancel it, they will offer you half off.
Yeah, but if you try and cancel on the second year, they're like, okay, bye. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what the second email address is for. You create a new Gmail account. And then you have a separate So what I do is I have like my email.adobe25, .adobe26, .adobe27, and then I'll just create a new Gmail account.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm paying the half price. I am not paying full price for Adobe. I'm sorry. It's just too damn.
No, it's ridiculous.
I'm willing to pay. I'm willing to pay something. I'm not willing to pay full price.
100%. I'm willing to pay. I'm just not that price. It's not for the number of products that I use. Right, and I think that's where Adobe does it wrong, is because they are forcing all of their products on you. And I would love to be able to have a lower talk about dark pattern. I would like to be able to have a smaller suite of products.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You can do one, but if you pick 3, it's more expensive than all of them.
Right? Exactly.
So I'm like, you know what? This is ridiculous. Like if you just went Photoshop, it's like $15 a month or $20 a month or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you do $20 here, $20 there, $20 there, you're paying more than the $60.
More than the full suite, which is ridiculous. Yeah, there should be a package of 3 or something.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right. Mara, I've had a blast talking to you today. I really appreciate you coming on. Before we get out of here, give yourself a plug. Let everybody know where they can find you and all the stuff.
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I gave you my link so you can do that, but it's linkedin.com/in/Mara Fraser, because I had my LinkedIn before I got married.
Ah, okay.
And once you personalize that URL, forget it. So, but luckily I have a passport so I can still vote.
Nice.
So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Always love connecting with other UX professionals, but don't try and sell me something.
Well, you got the passport, so you're not going to be impacted by all those silly executive orders, I guess. Is that...
Yeah, no, I'll still be able to vote. So if that thing passes...
I have lost faith in the American public. So, all right. On that note, Mara, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was so great to talk with you. And anytime you want to talk psychology, you just let me know, because I'm all about it.
All about it. All right, Mara. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it from Mara and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on why psychology is so important. You got to remember that we are designing for humans, and humans are animals, and we act on instinct. And we don't always work exactly how you think we might. But I'm curious, how has psychology helped you with your practice, a product designer, UX designer? Has it helped you? What kind of interesting things have you uncovered? I'd love to learn more about some of your usability studies and how they've gone. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of the stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That'd be fantastic. Don't forget to check out the Beyond UX Design shop. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful UX-themed art prints and digital downloads that you can print yourself. Grab your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design. Master your craft beyond pixels and prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30. And use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. If you're tired of staring at a blank Figma canvas, head on over to mobbin.com/beyondux to access over 400,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows with a library that grows bigger every week. Kickstart your creativity, streamline your workflow, and level up your design process. Get inspired with Mobbin today. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. All right, great. I have a cold, by the way, today. So
you sound really good for somebody who's slightly congested.
Really? Yeah, I might start sneezing or coughing. I'll mute myself, so I won't have to put you through that.